the investigation into the shooting of Michael Drury, I mean, it's a shocking thing that's happened.
A serving police officer murdered or attempted to be murdered because of his carrying out his duties.
Carrying out his duties in his own home.
If something untoward is done by Roger, he can keep it very close to himself on what his intent is, because he just seemed to weave so much power.
With 8 kilos of heroin, Ned was going to distribute some of that in Sydney. He claimed at one stage to be Australia's biggest heroin dealer.
It might allow you to do
whatever I want to do.
Anything at all.
Anything at all.
Murder?
Well, I'm not into murder, but would have if I wanted to, I suppose.
Somebody tries to murder him by running him over with a car on the footpath. Car comes up on the footpath, bang, into Ned. Ned goes down. Car tries to reverse over him, misses.
How old are you now?
41.
Are you going to make 50?
It doesn't look like it, does it?
Sallie-Anne Huckstepp, she's murdered.
She's murdered in 1986. Sallie-Anne went on 60 Minutes in 1981, a week or 8 days after her boyfriend was shot dead. In a way, she blows the whistle on Roger in a big way. I mean, it's national TV, it's prime time. For Roger, that party gets spoiled when the Crown says, well, we're going to appeal this all the way to the High Court. The High Court overturns his acquittal, as it were, and says, Roger, you're going back to jail.
The I Catch Killers podcast was a fresh start for me, as I left policing behind and started a new life. Over the years, we've laughed together, cried, and shared some powerful moments. Welcome to I Catch Killers. Welcome back to part 2 of my chat with award-winning journalist Neil Mercer. Neil's been a crime reporter for a long time and is also the author of the book called The Kingpin and the Crooked Cop, the story of Neddy Smith and Roger Rogerson, partners in crime. Now, after part 1, if we all feel a little bit dirty because we've delved into a murky world, there's a lot that happened in that time, isn't there, Neil?
There's a huge amount that went on around Roger and Ned, and the number of shootings, the number of robberies, the number of court cases. It's between the two of them. There are people who were murdered, killed, or disappeared. It's an extraordinary part of not just policing history, I don't think. And part of the reason I really wanted to try and pin a lot of this stuff down is there's so much rumour and speculation and urban myth, and I think this is part of Sydney's history.
Well, it is Sydney's history, and there's a blurb for the book, and I'll just read it out because it talks very much to what you just said. Their multiple crimes were committed against a backdrop of a changing Australia from the late 70s to the mid-80s, as Australia's social fabric stretched to adapt to a more global world, and money and drugs poured into the country. Police, judges and even the media were up for sale, and Rogerson and Smith were the princes of this violent new world. It sums it up pretty well, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, absolutely, and Roger was, and I've described him as such as a prince of the city, and he was untouchable. And Ned, I mean, wow, from that early conviction, he moves into heroin dealing in the late 70s. He's in fact linked up with a very famous syndicate that got picked up in Bangkok and fellows with 8 kilos of heroin. Ned was going to distribute some of that in Sydney. He claimed at one stage to be Australia's biggest heroin dealer. That might have just been Ned sort of embellishing the facts, which he had, he was prone to do. But nevertheless, he was a big figure in Sydney in the late 70s, mid-70s on into the early 80s. And I guess from a public perspective, these two guys really come to prominence, in my view, for the first time, to public prominence in 1981 when... by this stage, Ned has been Roger's informer for 5 years, they've got a very close relationship for 5 years. And we have the shooting of Warren Lanfranchi. Yeah,
let's take it through that, because that seemed to be the turning point, didn't it? Where people go and hold it, something that's a bit smelly here. That's right.
And, June 27, 1981, it's a Saturday afternoon, just before 3 p.m, in Dangar Place, which is just down from Sydney University. It's parallel to Cleveland Street, I think. Just over the road from the Britannia Hotel. Lanfranchi walks in to meet Rogerson, apparently to try and do some deal, because Warren Lanfranchi is a heroin dealer. He thinks he's there to bribe Rogerson. Rogerson says, and has always maintained, that he was there to arrest Lanfranchi. And once again, the place is surrounded by very heavily armed police, at least 18 of them. So there are police officers in cars. There's a couple of cops in the pub who are having a schooner. We're about to have their second.
That's unusual.
Lanfranchi is shot dead. What we know for absolute certain, Warren Lanfranchi is shot dead by Roger Rogerson just before 3 o'clock that Saturday afternoon. One shot goes through the heart, one is in the neck.
Yeah.
Incredibly, Roger almost immediately does a newspaper interview with the Sunday Telegraph. Good on the reporter from the Sunday Telly. Yeah. I mean, it's a big scoop, but it's sort of portrayed in this way. Roger was walking the mean streets alone. Was it a bit like High Noon? The Hollywood movie, the old Hollywood movie. Oh, yeah, it was a bit like that, says Roger. And there's this, I guess, image of the sheriff cleaning up the mean streets. Yeah, he's on his own. Well, he wasn't quite on his own. He had 18 other police around him and 3 others in the lane with him. That first day is probably the only day he gets away with it, because pretty much straight up in the following days there's a suggestion that Lanfranchi had $10,000 on him to bribe Rogerson, that he didn't have a gun, so Rogerson didn't shoot him in self-defence, as he claimed, and it starts to balloon from there, and Warren's girlfriend, Sallie-Anne Huckstepp, goes on 60 Minutes, national TV, makes some of these allegations. And I went round, I was working in 1981, it was the first crime story I ever really did, went to see Keith Lanfranchi.
The father.
The father. And Keith tells me that his son has been shot in cold blood. It's because he's ripped off one of Roger's heroin dealers a few weeks earlier, and that he's also been told that rather than the shots in the laneway that Saturday afternoon being fired in quick succession, as Roger had told the Sunday Telly, the shots were 12 to 13 seconds apart, which opens up a whole range of possibility.
That changes dynamics.
It did. And look, the end result was, I guess, that there was an inquest. It was unsatisfactory, to say the least, in that the Lanfranchi family wanted to air a lot of allegations, because the person who drives Warren Lanfranchi to that fateful meeting that Saturday afternoon is Ned Smith. The Lanfranchi family and Sallie-Anne Huckstepp's lawyers, they want to explore Roger's relationship with Ned, and also Ned's relationship to Warren Lanfranchi, because Warren was selling some of Ned's heroin. Yeah. None of that is allowed. And, Roger have always maintained that Warren Lanfranchi came in, he was always going to be arrested, hence the police all around, and that he pulled a gun and Roger got his gun out first and fired those 2 fatal shots, or the 2 shots that killed him. Yeah, look, the inquest itself, the family thought it was a farce, and they had a point.
Yeah, and there's other stuff, and we won't go into all the detail about the firearm that he was supposedly carrying and all sorts of things, what he was wanted for at the time, the shooting the police officer. It's murky, and there's a smell about it, and it continues to this day, doesn't it?
It does, but the smell it started in pretty much, as I said, within days. With all the allegations from Warren's dad, from Sallie-Anne Huckstepp. But, the inquest found that Roger had shot him trying to effect an arrest.
Yeah.
And as you say, people still talk about it. And, look, it's unresolved in the public mind.
Yeah. And I think, you said there was 18 police there. I know the culture of policing. I know the pressures of operations. I know how it works in the little cliques. If something untoward is done by Roger, he can keep it very close to himself on what his intent is, because he just seemed to weave so much power.
Yeah, it's that's exactly right. I mean, there's no way that you can keep 18 police quiet for 40 years if it's something untoward has happened and they've seen it. I mean, there were civilian witnesses nearby. There were people over in the pub who made statements. There are ambulance officers who arrived within minutes of the shooting because their base was only a kilometre away. It is, the family has always said Warren was murdered. The coroner said, no, or the jury actually found that Warren was shot by Rogerson while he was trying to effect an arrest. And the failure of the inquest to me was not to call a lot of witnesses who were then alive, who could have at least been cross-examined.
Yeah.
He didn't want to know. He was, in the parlance of the day, the magistrate at the time was a policeman, not because he'd been in the cops, but because he supported the police force.
Yeah.
He was very much on the side of detectives, and he didn't like crooks.
And that's how we would talk quite often about judicial officers. No, he's a police officer, as in not the fact, as you said, he wasn't in the police, but they just pro police. That seemed to be the all the shine started to come off Roger after that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he had that 24 hours of being, Gary Cooper in High Noon. Yeah. But that's the first time he really comes to public prominence, and it's the first time Neddy Smith really comes to public prominence. By that stage, they've known each other since 1976, so they've been working on and off together in whatever form that may take. But yeah, it's from that point that they both become known, because Ned is actually named in state parliament as the person who drove him there. Roger's name is now bandied around. There's calls for a judicial inquiry. Roger becomes too hot for the CIB. They move him down to Darlinghurst, and he's there for a couple of years, and eventually then other matters happen. There's never a judicial inquiry into the Lanfranchi shooting. There was a Supreme Court hearing, or a court hearing at least. Keith Lanfranchi applied for a second inquest. That was knocked back. The judge was scathing of the case and said there was nothing further to be done. The inquest had been held, it was fair, and that was that.
Okay, that's the system working, isn't it? Or the system, whether it's working, that is how the system operates, I should say. That's
right, and it worked in Roger's favour in that case.
Okay, now we're going to head into where the certainly tipped against Roger, and I know any supporters after this one within the police started to distance themselves from him. The shooting of Mick Drury. Mick Drury was an undercover police officer, had been working undercover on some drug trades. Yeah,
Mick Drury. This is, by now, Roger's at Darlinghurst. He goes there in 1982. Mick Drury, as you say, was involved in a drug deal down in Melbourne, but as an undercover officer, he's trying to arrest a guy called Alan Williams, who's a big heroin dealer, associated with the painters and dockers and all that sort of stuff. Williams is arrested. He's going through the court process, but Williams has got a lot of money, and he's got a lot of connections in Sydney, and one of them is with a guy called Chris Flannery. And Williams really doesn't want Michael Drury, the undercover officer, to get to court. Or if he gets to court, he wants him to change his evidence about identifying him. So the trial procedures start to flow. Williams is desperate to avoid a conviction. The only person who can identify him from that drug deal that night is Mick Drury. He wants to bribe Drury. How does he do that? He's Melbourne-based. Well, he's got a good mate in Sydney by the name of Christopher Dale Flannery, because they've been through the prison system in Melbourne together. He phones Flannery, says, look, Mick Drury, we just offer him a lot of money, or do you know anybody in there who can in the cops, who can help me get Mick Drury off my back? And Flannery says, yes, he does. He says he knows a good cop by the name of Roger Rogerson. So this is all in train, 82, 83, 84, Drury refuses point blank to accept a bribe. No, I've identified Alan Williams as the man with the heroin, and I'm not going to change my evidence. They upped the offer to, 35 grand or whatever it was. Drury remains steadfast. Then Alan Williams, the heroin dealer, starts to think, geez, I'm in real trouble here.
Yeah.
And he comes up to Sydney. He meets with Rogerson and Chris Flannery, and eventually there's a number of meetings. He comes up to Sydney a bit. Long story short, they have dinner one night. He says, Williams, Roger Rogerson and Chris Flannery, and Flannery and Rogerson knew each other, and they come to an arrangement to make sure Mick Drury doesn't make court. Alan Williams said he didn't know how that was actually going to play out, but he knew what that meant, and he was prepared to pay $100,000 for Drury not to make court, i.e. to be murdered.
Yeah.
And that's what almost happened in 1984. Mick Drury's at home with his little kids and his wife in his own house in his kitchen when he is shot through the kitchen window and shockingly wounded. He barely survives. He, I think, is unconscious, near death for like 10 days. He eventually comes around and makes what was then called Drury's dying deposition, and in that he says, I think this is related to the job down in Melbourne with Alan Williams, and I've got to say that Roger Rogerson offered me a bribe to drop off the case or to change my identification of Williams. I refused it, and I think that's why I've been shot. I'm shortcutting a lot of stuff here, Gary, but
Neil, just on that point with the dying deposition, it's part of getting that I believe I might shortly die. This is like the confession from a potential dead man.
He's hovering close to death.
So when you're telling something, with purpose.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think anybody, apart from Roger, ever thought he made it up.
Yeah.
Some people were in two minds early on. I think later on, people have no doubt that Mick Drury was telling the truth, and he was shot because of that case. And Roger is charged in 1984, I think it is, first with the attempted bribery. I mean, this was a bit of I'm afraid to say, a bit of a dog's breakfast.
Yeah. The
The investigation into the shooting of Michael Drury. I mean, it's a shocking thing that's happened.
A serving police officer murdered or attempted to be murdered because of his carrying out his duties.
Carrying out his duties in his own home.
Yeah.
The investigation, because it's Rogerson, I mean, people don't want to believe that Roger could possibly be involved in the attempted murder of one of his own. The commissioner of the day is expressing dismay. So you've got two investigations running. One was the investigation into the attempted bribery, and one was the investigation into the attempted murder of Drury. And they're running parallel, but not knowing what the other one was doing.
Yeah.
Look, eventually Roger is charged with the attempted bribery of Drury. He gets off that. A few years later, Roger's charged with the attempted murder of Michael Drury because in those intervening years, Alan Williams, the heroin dealer, who's at the beginning of it all, rolls over and says, yeah, I was part of a plot to murder Mick Drury, and I met with Roger Rogerson and Chris Flannery, and I offered $100,000 to have it done.
Yeah.
I didn't know how exactly or when exactly it was going to happen, but so he pleads guilty to the attempted murder. He gets jailed. He gives evidence against Roger, but he's an ex-painter and docker. He's a bloke dealing in heroin, and Roger's got this fantastic character, quote unquote. And because the attempted bribery case had been run earlier, and failed. Roger was found not guilty.
Yeah.
Some of that evidence in that case, because of the rules of the court, some of that evidence in the first case could not be used in the attempted murder case,
Yeah.
so the prosecution was in a way hamstrung. And also Williams, he's a good crook, and he's up against Roger Rogerson.
And just how the cards might fall for Roger too, Christopher Flannery disappears.
Yes, that's right. He disappears May 1985, never to be seen. So there's no way in the world Chris Flannery can give evidence against anybody because he's long gone. Where he's gone, nobody knows. There is a long list of suspects, and Roger was one. But yeah, the suspects, people who might have wanted to kill Chris Flannery, was a bit like a Melbourne Cup field, I think.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, this long and involved saga, the attempted the shooting of Michael Drury, which is really, one of my colleagues described it as a stain that will stay with the New South Wales Police for a long, long time. And I think he's right. It's unresolved because Roger gets off it all because he's this,
And there was, suggestions, inferences or whatever. Yeah, I think even that Mick people went hard at him. Why are you saying this? And pull your head in.
Oh, they tried various people, and I think it was Roger, and with a bit of help from Ned, did their very, very best to blacken the character of Mick Drury.
Yeah.
And it was all crap.
Yeah.
They made stuff up about, he's having affairs, he's doing all this, he's corrupt. It was all garbage. It was pretty straightforward, but Roger doesn't survive this in a way, even though he's found not guilty, because as all this is unfolding in 1984, as he's charged with the first one, the attempted bribery of Drury, he is suspended without pay.
Yeah.
So effectively, his last day in the New South Wales Cops is November, roundabout there in 1984.
Yeah.
He's suspended without pay. He goes on to beat the bribery charge and the attempted murder charge. And,
we'll reference a conversation we had off mic of around the time how divisive it was within the police, because police didn't want to believe that one of their own would have organised to murder Drury. And a good friend of mine, I won't mention his name, but a well-respected detective was supporting Roger, or thinking that he's, from what I've seen of him, he's fine. But then they find out that Roger, when he's suspended, that there was an account that he had with $110,000, and the police that were loyal to Roger, or just loyal to the fact that he was a police officer, were whipping round a fighting fund for Roger, and then they find out that he's got this account.
Exactly, I remember that, and I, like yourself, I knew a detective at that time and I spoke to him, and he said, I gave $50 or $100 to Roger's fighting fund because I thought he was innocent, or, I wasn't convinced that he'd done the wrong thing. And then they find out that Roger has 2 bank accounts with a total of about $110,000 in them. To say they're a bit pissed off, the police that have been putting in this money, is an understatement. He lost a lot of support, partly over Michael Drury and partly over that, because there's all this cash in there, in bank accounts in false names.
Yeah.
Roger says, part of that $110,000 belongs to a business friend of mine who's a bit of a gambler, which is sort of handy because then you can't trace it, of course. And also part of it comes from the proceeds of the sale of a Bentley that I've been restoring. Wow. Nothing about Roger or Ned is straightforward. It is. I wish it was. I must say, sometimes I felt writing this book, I felt quite overwhelmed by the twists and turns, and sometimes you could sort of find yourself in a hall of mirrors going, geez, well, hang on, I thought I understood what this was going on, and now I find out this. What the bloody hell is going on here?
Where does the truth lie?
Yeah.
When did it? At what stage did it blow up? When I say blow up, I remember the interview, the Ray Martin interview. On I think it was a Current Affair, was it, or 60 Minutes?
Current Affair.
Current Affair, when Roger's come on that I feel like I need to defend myself.
Yeah,
so because that was fascinating.
Roger is suspended without pay in '84. He is going to be finally in 1986. They decide to boot him out of the force. Those proceedings are about to happen. Roger goes on the offensive, the front foot.
Yep.
He says, I want to go on Ray Martin. I want to go on a Current Affair, which at the time was being hosted by Ray Martin. And he goes on TV. It's pre-recorded for legal reasons.
Yeah.
But, I don't think he'd thought through what he was going to say because... he names Lenny McPherson as a police informer and Ned Smith as a police informer, which, well, is a good way of getting somebody killed for a start, but is not what a police officer should be doing on national television. But, he also says stuff that is just unbelievable. Ray Martin says, have you ever seen any corruption in the New South Wales Police Force? No. Ever had any dealings with a corrupt police officer? No, I've never met a corrupt police officer in my life. And if he was looking for public support or to win over public sympathy, I think it completely backfired because people were going, oh, come on, there's got to be one. You've got to bet one or two.
Yeah. Do you think what took him there was desperation or his own ego or hubris, or what was it that thought that was a good play?
It's a good question. I'm not really sure, but I guess he probably thought he had nothing to lose.
Yeah.
He was going to be booted out of the cops anyway, without superannuation. Well, I'm not sure how much super existed in those days, but without any benefits that he might have accrued. I think he thought he had nothing to lose. I think he felt that he could still pull off a performance that would win him some sympathy.
Yeah.
As you say, it's ego. A couple of people said to him, are you sure you want to do this? He said, yep, no problem. Well, it was a problem because obviously he names Lenny and Ned Smith as informers. That's then used against him as further ammunition to kick him out.
Breaching police protocol.
Breaching police protocol, bringing the New South Wales Police into disrepute.
Yeah. And
that's they boot him out on those disciplinary matters. He's not kicked out because of any criminal conviction.
Yeah.
It's an extraordinary thing that he did, but he used the media often. I mean, I did that interview with him in 1982.
Yeah.
He's going on the front foot. He does the interview after shooting Lanfranchi. Which is incredible. He goes on Ray Martin on national TV when he's really under a lot of fire.
It's almost like you, because the next part I want to talk about, it's almost like you can't make this stuff up. Like if you pin this, if this was in the fiction section, I'd be going, Neil, you've gone too far. This doesn't happen. But didn't Neddy get run over or an attempt on his life after Roger's appearance?
Roger appears on A Current Affair. Don't hold me to the exact day, but he appears one night, and I'm pretty certain he names Ned as an informer. I think the next day or the day after, Ned is walking down a footpath in Alexandria near the Iron Duke Hotel, which he used to have a beer at. Somebody tries to murder him by running him over with a car on the footpath. The car comes up on the footpath, bang, into Ned. Ned goes down. Car tries to reverse over him, misses. Luckily for Ned, he struggles into the Iron Duke and is sort of, then goes to hospital, discharges himself. He's got broken arms, legs. He's not in a good shape. But he then decides he wants to go on A Current Affair. which he does. A night or so later, again with Ray Martin.
Ray would have been sitting there going, "Oh, this is good."
Ray was over the moon. This is, as you say, you almost couldn't make this stuff up because Ned, because he's badly injured, I think was choppered in on the Channel 9 chopper, which lands, and the old Channel 9 headquarters, and that's all filmed and goes to air. And Ned denies that he's, a police informer. He just says, I make my money out of a bit of SP, a bit of stealing, a bit of this and that, generally downplays his criminal career. But yeah, they on national television, as you say, you couldn't make it up.
No, you can't. And then referencing another media interview back from the 60 Minutes, Sallie-Anne Huckstepp, she's murdered.
She's murdered in 1986, very early 1986. She's found in Centennial Park in Sydney in a pond. She's found early one morning, certainly one morning by, I think, a jogger or somebody walking their dog. They see a body floating. Police are called. She's known very well to a lot of police because she's been around for a long time. They identify her as Sallie-Anne Huckstepp. She, at first, the very first day or two, the pathologist who examines her says, it might not be murder. She might have had a heroin shot and drowned in the lake. That's pretty quickly dispensed with when a second opinion is called for, and she's strangled. There's no two ways about it. She's been murdered.
Yeah.
That's not.
And just reminding people that this is Sallie-Anne Huckstepp, who was Warren Lanfranchi's girlfriend, who went on 60 Minutes to say that he was murdered.
That's right. And Sallie-Anne went on 60 Minutes in 1981, a week or 8 days after her boyfriend was shot dead. In a way, she blows the whistle on Roger in a big way. I mean, it's national TV. Yeah. It's prime time. He obviously hates her. Ned Smith hates her as well. So that's 81. She's murdered in 86. She's a complex person as well.
Yeah.
She's a whistleblower. She was incredibly courageous to do that interview, I think. But in late 85 and early 86, she's running around with 2 federal police. And she's doing it very publicly in King's Cross, out at the Long Bay. She's seen with these 2 federal cops, and word is getting around that she's informing.
Yeah.
Whether that's, I think the coroner suggested that was a reason that she was murdered, that people saw her doing this, were uncertain of what she was doing, but Roger's been accused of her murder. Ned Smith is eventually actually charged with her murder, but that comes quite a number of years later. In fact, over a decade later.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm trying to keep up with them all. We've got Roger. He's out of the police now. Ned's they've had their toing and froing on with Ray Martin.
Yep.
Ned's been run over. Then Ned gets himself into the trouble. There was a murder. The tow truck driver, a road rage incident. That's
right. So 84 is Roger's last day in the cops. 86, he's officially kicked out. He's still hanging around with Ned. 87 comes around, and sometime towards the end of 87, I think it is. Don't hold me to the dates here, because there are a lot of dates. Yeah. There are a lot of incidents. But he's having a drink with Roger at, I think, the Covent Garden Hotel in Chinatown. Ned's there with a mate of his. It's a big session. There's a lot of beer and other drinks had, middies. At some stage in the evening, around 7 or 8, Ned and his mate decide it's a great idea to drive to Coogee to bat on drinking. They leave Roger behind.
Something tells me they're not the type to worry about drink driving. But
no,
anyway.
I think it was a miracle, given the amount of alcohol consumed. Yeah. It was a miracle they actually managed to get to Coogee.
Got that far.
They got that far. A judge later actually commented on that. They're in Coogee Bay Road, Sydney's eastern suburbs, and they all of a sudden stop near a fish and chip shop. Nobody knows why, whether they're hungry. A tow truck with 2 blokes in it pulls up behind. Ned and his mate are blocking the traffic. The tow truck driver flashes his lights. Bad mistake. Ned's mate gets out of the car, comes around, tries to belt the tow truck driver. The passenger of the tow truck gets out. He starts to have a blue. All of a sudden, you've got Ned Smith, his mate, and the 2 blokes in the tow truck having a barney outside a fish and chip shop, but also being seen by diners in a restaurant and people on the footpath. In that fight, the passenger in the tow truck driver, a bloke called Ronnie Flavel, is stabbed to death.
Yeah.
He dies pretty much on the footpath. Ned and his mate bolt. They're arrested very soon after. Initially, Ned gets bail because it's such a confused crime scene.
Melee.
And it's night time and people have been drinking. He gets bail, so he's out and saying, I've never stabbed anybody in my life. So you've got all these cases with both Roger and Ned not running parallel but running over each other a lot of the time. So they're in and out of court. I don't know how either of them... I mean, with Rogerson in particular, I mean, whatever you say about him, he had a certain resilience to be accused of all this stuff time and time and time again. And he's still standing. So Ned Smith's in trouble for murder and he's awaiting trial. So...
And where have we got Roger at this stage? So he's out of the police. Any idea what Roger was doing? I know I saw him at one time saying he's installing security bars.
He was installing security. He was a bit of a handyman.
Yeah.
He could do a bit of welding, all that sort of stuff. He was probably better than a handyman. He was installing security grills. He was doing some work, for the New South Wales Department of Housing. Minor sort of stuff.
Yeah.
He was also at one stage involved with a company that made safes.
Yeah.
He's doing a range of things, but he's generally, he says, pretty down on his luck. He's got nothing from the police force.
Yep.
He's doing the best he can, as they say.
Okay, we've got him doing that. He then got dragged into ICAC inquiry, or was it the Royal Commission?
There's a few things unfolding as usual with nothing simple with Roger, because we've mentioned the $110,000 in the bank accounts. Yep. He's charged with that for conspiracy to pervert the course of justice.
Yep. There's
$110,000 in the bank. False names, which I have to point out was not actually an offence. You could do it, but Roger doing it obviously attracted a fair bit of attention. He's charged with conspiring to pervert the course of justice. He's convicted because his excuses as to where the money came from are not believed.
Yeah.
And there's a critical witness who gives evidence against him and says what Roger says is a lie. He didn't get that money from me.
Yeah.
So he's sentenced to jail. He appeals. He wins his appeal in the Court of Criminal Appeal, bounces out of jail. He's served about 12 months and says, I always knew that justice would win through. I'm a firm believer in the system of justice. It's a triumph. And he's...
I remember the standing on the steps of the...
And I think he's wearing an armed hold-up squad tie,
Yeah.
even though he hasn't been there for a long time. For Roger, that party gets spoiled when the Crown says, well, we're going to appeal this all the way to the High Court.
Yep.
The High Court overturns his acquittal, as it were, and says, Roger, you're going back to jail.
Back inside. So
So he's back inside. That's 92, 95. He serves 3 years. In the meantime, let's jump back to Ned. He's up for the murder charge of the tow truck driver, Ronnie Flavel. He's out on bail. The following year, I think it is, he decides that it might be a good idea to rob Botany Council. Armed robbery. Armed hold-up squad. Not Roger. Different armed hold-up squad, or different detectives are waiting for him. He's caught red-handed outside Botany Council with guns, balaclavas, the whole box and dice. He's gone. Yeah. He's absolutely gone. And so his freedom ends that day. Judges taking a fairly dim view of somebody already on bail for murder, committing an armed robbery, and he never gets out.
Not a good look. But he managed to bring himself unstuck. We're talking Ned here, when he was in prison, because he had a big mouth and was talking to his cellmate about a number of crimes, and I think. It was at John Laycock, I think, was heading up a strike force related to that with 7 murders, and he was in fact charged with multiple murders, wasn't he? On the back of admissions he'd made to a fellow prisoner.
Absolutely. So he's in jail for he eventually gets convicted of the murder of Ronnie Flavel. So he's in jail for life. And life doesn't mean in those days life. It means probably about 12, 15 years. But while he's in jail, he's trying to get out, and he goes to various authorities with allegations of police corruption. That comes to pretty much nothing, although there is a public inquiry, and there's a lot of publicity. But for Ned, by the mid-90s, he's still languishing in prison, and he's not on protection, but he's in a particular part of the jail which houses prison informers. An informer comes in to his unit. It's called a unit. There are 2 cells, and there's a very small common area that both prisoners can use. Ned gets chatting to this prisoner, and he knows that the other bloke's an informer as well, because that's why he's in this particular unit of the prison.
I'm familiar with the area.
Yeah.
Hello.
It's not like, So Ned proves to be his own worst enemy, big time. Not being able to help himself, he starts to talk to this prisoner. In the book I've called him Terry, obviously not his real name. Terry has been in a bit of strife all his life, most of his adult life. And he tells me this in an interview. He said, geez, he just kept on going on and on and on. I felt like saying, shut the F up. But then Terry, obviously, having been around the system, goes, well, maybe I can turn this to my advantage. He contacts his case officer, a New South Wales detective, and the cops go, this could be good.
Worthwhile.
Could be worthwhile. They plant a listening device in a computer that's being used in the cell. And that then records Ned confessing to the murder of Sallie-Anne Huckstepp, a small-time crook that knew Ned very well called Harvey Jones. He confesses to another murder of a drug dealer, Luton Shue, who was found buried south of Sydney. He confesses in all to a significant number of murders. And this is all tape recorded.
Yeah.
So it's not like a prison informer going, he told me this, he told me that. They've got it on tape.
Yeah.
Ned's in round about 1996, Ned is charged with 7 of the murders to which he's confessed. They don't charge him with all of the ones because sometimes there's not enough corroborative evidence. But 7's not a bad start. He's convicted of the murder of Harvey Jones, who was he was a tall, lanky bloke that used to hang around with Ned. He was a sort of a wannabe gangster. Yeah. His last scene, I think, with Ned at the Star Hotel, Ned confesses to this cellmate. He says, this is Harvey Jones. He was becoming a pest. I blew his heart out with a big .357 revolver.
Right.
And he describes also in this tape recording where he's got rid of him, at near the airport.
Yeah.
At that stage, Harvey Jones, his body has never been found. But fortuitously, or well, not for Ned, but luckily for the investigating police, about 6 months after Ned makes that confession to his prisoner mate, the remains of Harvey Jones are discovered pretty much exactly where Ned said he'd buried him.
That'll do it.
And that will do it. And also the bullet fragments, or whatever they were, the ballistics evidence supports the fact that a .357 revolver was used. Could have been a .38, but it's consistent also with the .357. So what Ned has said in jail and been recorded matches up with what is found.
It's interesting because he was only convicted of the Harvey Jones one. He was found not guilty with Sallie-Anne Huckstepp. But the fact that fortuitously corroborative evidence was discovered on that probably sealed the deal on him being convicted of that. It leads you to say he wasn't talking all fantasy, that what he was talking about the other one. So,
well, he claimed he was just making it all up.
Yeah, just big coincidence with Harvey's.
Big coincidence with Harvey, and also there was a witness who helped bury Harvey's body who eventually came forward and said, yeah, I was there and I helped bury the body. So between the secret jail recordings, the location of Harvey's body, where Ned said he'd put it, and the informer, he's gone for all money on that one. Look, he tried to claim he was making all this stuff up, that he was big noting. The trouble is that a lot of it, he knew these people. He'd written about it in some of his books. He'd written about knowing a lot of these people.
Now, it might take you into the psychology of hard-working police, I say. But I was working on a strike force at police headquarters, and that strike force investigating those 7 murders was working in another incident room beside me. I had 2 people on my investigation that was a serial killer, and they had about a dozen people in their strike force room. And I'd always complain, it can't be that hard, you've read a book. Come and help me work on my investigation. But it reminded me of a time I'm stuck on my own on one side, and they were on the other side investigating that he'd written about it.
Oh, yeah, he'd partly written about Harvey Jones, how he was a pest, a pain on the backside. Of course, all this is produced in court against him. Yeah. And it's his own words, although I've read the transcript of that one. At one stage he said, I didn't write that. I didn't write that in. Those are not my words. Somebody else wrote those. Which
is there any part of your book, Neil, you want to take out?
No, not so far. So, look, he's, of course, he says, this is corrupt New South Wales police getting back at him for making allegations. And that defence is run, and, it's run very strongly by his barrister, Winston Terracini, who, makes a very, very good case for it. But,
Winston's never backward in coming forward.
He is not backward, and he is some of the stuff he said, I've quoted it in the book. It's terrific. I mean, Ned could not say he did not get a good defence in any of the cases. But look, at the end of the day, he's convicted of Harvey Jones and he is sentenced to life, meaning life. He's never getting out. He beats the charge of murdering Sallie-Anne Huckstepp, although personally I think he's good for it. Yeah. And they don't proceed with the others.
But he's in jail for life. He was suffering Parkinson's disease the latter part of his life. And what year did he pass away in?
He passed away a couple of years ago.
2021. He was
Pardon me.
76 at the time.
Yeah. Look, he probably lived a lot longer than most people thought because he did have Parkinson's. It obviously got progressively worse. When I met him that time at lunch at Perinia's restaurant, I didn't discern any Parkinson's. Yeah. He did have it, but it wasn't noticeable, or I can't remember it. But he got a lot worse, and in the end, he was pretty much unable to look after himself in jail.
Okay. Roger, Tales of Roger. He ended with a grand finish with the Jamie Gow murder. But in the lead up to that, he got put back inside for another, was it lying to the Police Integrity Commission?
Yeah, he gets caught for perjury.
Yep.
He's called to an inquiry, and Roger's doing some building work, minor building work, as we've discussed, and he's got a mate at Liverpool Council who's helping him get some work.
Right.
The bloke at Liverpool Council is known as Mr. 10% because when he gave out the contract, you'd give
Is
him...
anyone clean here?
Well, good old Sydney councils, mate.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a long, I wouldn't say proud tradition, but anyway, the contract is Roger's getting some work. I think he might have got about 50 grand's worth. And he's called to this inquiry and he's asked, was this bloke... Did you ever describe this bloke as Mr. 10%? No. Did you ever pay him 10%? No, it's all rubbish. Of course, they've got Roger's house bugged.
Yeah.
They then play him the tape recordings, and Roger's there, might have been even on Christmas Day, and he's going, so-and-so, he's known as Mr. 10%. I've got to put 10% aside.
Yeah.
He's lied. He's gone for perjury. And I think that was the late 90s, but he doesn't actually go to jail until about 2005.
Yeah.
It's a long, drawn-out process.
And I could imagine Roger going into that, he'd be thinking, he'd almost enjoy it, like it'd almost give him a little bit of, I can play this is what an inquiry, I'll just talk my way out of that.
You read the transcript and it sounds like that. At one stage he's been asked about something or other and he says, I can't remember, my memory's not what it used to be. And the barrister who's cross-examining him, he says, maybe you can have a bit of a think. And Roger says, I'll give it a oil and grease change and get it ready for the next time. And it's this sort of humorous throwaway line.
He's and I don't like him. The shame, the crimes he's committed, and the shame he's brought on police. But there's something about him. It's just he just kept turning up, didn't he?
He kept turning up, and look, in the book I say, in the prologue I said, I met him a lot over many years. He was good company. I liked him.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, if you were around Roger for a while, it was almost impossible not to like him. It's not to say I wasn't aware of who he was.
Good company, I suppose you could describe it as.
Terrific company.
Yeah.
Always had a good story or had the latest, not gossip, but he continued, even after when he gets out of the cops, he continues to mix with all these crooks.
Yeah.
So he still knows everybody in the city.
I wondered quite often his name would get dropped when I was on investigations or whatever, and I'm not sure if it was people just trading off his reputation or whether he was really involved in things. It was a bit of a mystery.
Oh, look, I think people have often used his name, and it's happened to me.
Yeah.
A couple of people have come up and said, Roger did this, Roger did that. And I said, when was that? And they said, it was, say, the late 90s. Yeah. And they're saying he's in the police force. And I'm going, mate, he wasn't in the police force then. And they go, maybe it wasn't him. I think Roger's name got bandied around a lot because it was convenient. Yeah. Either way.
It carried, and it made people think, and they're connected. They know Roger. I'll get Roger to come and speak to you, or something like that. So his name could be used in that way. But he certainly didn't share any remorse or embarrassment. He was doing his stage show with Chopper Reed, and you hear snippets of the stage show. You would have seen it, but there was no remorse for the people that were killed.
There was no remorse for anybody. He turned it to his advantage, and he was sometimes macabre in some of the things he said. And I remember something about the Philip Weston shooting. Yeah. And for many years, Roger actually claimed he was one of the police that had shot Philip Weston, the armed robber who was killed up at Avoca. And in his stage shows, he would say something like, we had Philip Weston surrounded, I had my shotgun, Weston stuck his head out of a bathroom window, we all let fly with the Remington, blew his head off. His dear old mum, Alice Blossom Weston, could only identify him by his ingrown toenails because there was nothing left of his head.
Yeah.
And, you'd sort of go, and I know a lot of his colleagues were going, what's he doing?
Yeah.
For a start, Roger didn't shoot Philip Weston.
Yep.
He was there, but he didn't actually shoot him, even though he told me he did. And at that stage, many years ago, Gary, I believed him.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't know why he would confess to that if he hadn't done it, but I think he just sort of added to his notoriety.
Traded off it.
But those sort of stories...
But to not show any remorse there,
No.
like all the times I've seen police involved in shooting incidents, especially if they've pulled the trigger and someone's been killed, they're not celebrating it.
No.
It impacts deeply on them, and that they carry it for the rest of their lives. And
that's right.
A normal person.
I don't think he had any remorse about any of the crimes or shootings, ever. I think the only remorse he ever showed was in relationship to his family, to his daughters, his wife. I think he was genuinely remorseful about that. But about the shooting of Lanfranchi, Butchie Byrne, Philip Weston, any case he was deeply involved in, I don't think there was any remorse there at all. And he certainly felt for a long time their bitterness that he'd been betrayed by the new broom in the New South Wales Police Force, because I think he said something, I was just doing what we'd always done, and all of a sudden they shifted the goalposts.
I can understand him having that. You created me, now you're shaming me for doing what you wanted me to do.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, Roger crossed that line.
Crossed the line.
It wasn't just a line. He was on another planet.
Yeah.
That was. It wasn't like they would put tough people together to do tough jobs, and I respect that and respect the jobs that these guys would do.
Yeah,
but
so
Roger just took it to a completely different level. And I think, and I got a sort of, not say satisfaction because someone was murdered, Jamie Gower, even if he was tied up in drugs, he didn't deserve what happened to him. But seeing Roger come unstuck in such I call it almost comical way, where he's walking, captured on CCTV, walking with with his hip and the waddle and all that. He just, to me, it just showed someone. To me, it was embarrassing for a detective to get caught in so many ways. He got caught on that particular murder. Do you want to just tell us briefly about that? We've had Russell Oxford on the show, and Russell gave us a very good insight into that investigation. But just a brief overview of that.
Well, Russell Oxford certainly knows a lot more about it than I do. But I mean, the year before he's charged with the shooting of Jamie Gower, 2014. Just a few months before, Roger had appeared in a civil matter, and he was sort of sitting there going, this is in court, and he's sitting there going, I wouldn't be committing crimes at my age. He said, I'm sort of past that. If I did, I'd probably be caught. Lo and behold, 2014, Jamie Gower gets shot, and as Russell's explained, storage unit. And there's all this CCTV of Roger with his very distinctive gait. I mean, he had a bad hip, he had a bad shoulder, I think he had arthritis, and he had gout.
It was like a waddle, wasn't it?
It was a waddle, yeah. And, you sort of shake your head. I remember when it first hit the headlines, the Daily Telegraph had a great scoop, Rogerson wanted for murder.
Yeah.
And I'm just going, what? And I rang an old colleague of his, and I said, have you seen Roger lately, like in the previous month or two? And he said something like, I saw him a couple of weeks ago. I said, has he still got all his marbles? And there was a pause, and he said, sharp as a tack. And I went, wow, because by then it was emerging that he'd been caught on CCTV, which was gathered up, hoovered up by Russell Oxford and his team, amongst many other things, into an overwhelming case, which I just can't figure out, perhaps like yourself, as to why or how he thought he was going to get away with that.
Yeah.
I mean, and also why at 73...
There's a time to retire for all of us, isn't there?
There is.
It's at 73 and tied up in the drug trade and murder. So,
It's an extraordinary end to what could have been a glittering career if he'd stayed, more on the straight and narrow, and
Yeah.
not, as you say, not just cross the line, but cross the planet.
Yeah. I think he was tried to appeal the sentence, didn't he? There was
he
and it was his good mate. We should give a shout out to him, the idiot Glenn McNamara.
How he and Roger met for the first time in around 2011. They were a very odd couple.
Yeah.
Why Roger was hooking up with a guy who was a pedestrian police officer, I think is fair.
Because I think that's a good way of saying it. Glenn McNamara, former New South Wales cop, and I think detective. People had asked me about him, and I said I've never heard of him. I can't think of anything that he's done, and not good, bad, or indifferent. He was just a nothing in the cops.
He made up part of his story. He wrote a book around about 2010, and he tells this story about how, as a detective, he was with another detective, was on the tail of Warren Lanfranchi just days before Lanfranchi was shot by Roger. He recounts this in his book, says, we couldn't find him, which was bad luck for Warren, because a few days later he's shot dead. He's not a detective.
Yeah.
He's in uniform at Sutherland at the very time he says he's working as a detective and chasing Lanfranchi. It never happened.
Sounds like a Walter Mitty type character.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And another one of his big cases was the Bikie Father's Day massacre. I asked somebody who was there, and they said, well, if he was there, he was directing traffic.
Yeah.
So he's either a fantasist or just a good old-fashioned, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say bullshit, but...
Yeah, we can.
Bullshit artist.
Yeah.
So he was making stuff up, and look, it's a mystery. The only thing I can think is that Roger thought he could be useful because he could manipulate him, and use him. That's the only thing I can think.
Yeah, that's and I'm looking completely from the outside, but that's what I was thinking. Just some numbskull that he would be in awe of Roger. And just Roger could get him doing whatever he wanted to do. Now, Roger, he passed away this year, January, and there was a lot of attention about that, and it just sort of reflects on the impact he's had in the psyche of their city in Sydney. And do you, Neil, think this type of thing could ever flourish again or occur again, or do you think there's too many checks and balances for the world to go off balance like it did with these pair?
You'd certainly hope it wouldn't happen again, and I can't see it happening again. I mean, there's now a lot more supervision within detectives, within squads. You've got the Police Integrity Commission, you've got the Independent Commission Against Corruption, you've got those sort of bodies. No, I just can't see it. He was the product partly of his era when he'd grown up with that.
Yeah.
He went into the force at 17. That's the way things had always been done. And he didn't sort of
realise that
the times they were changing.
Musical chairs and the music stopped and you're still standing.
He's still standing.
Yeah.
No, I can't see it happening again. And no, I mean, there's sometimes a bit of nostalgia. Somebody said once, we need more we need more cops like Roger Rogerson to give people a good kick up the arse, like the good old days. And the good old days, well, they were good old days in some ways, but they're pretty bad as well when you look at Roger.
I think it's like all, you look back in the 20s and the 30s or policing in the Depression era, around an area like this, and hard people, and they need hard cops. It changes, it evolves. You need smart people, you need strong people as well. But Roger was, because I know people that were in that same vintage as what Roger went through in the cops, and there were some hard men and women, but with a different way of approaching policing. This is what they were shown when they came in. But the world had changed, and I think with Roger, what annoys me about him is I love hard policing. I like the people that have got the reputation of doing the right thing. Some great police officers that I know that have gone through. And Roger sort of tainted it for a lot of people. Roger tainted it for a lot of people that, well, we've got to be careful of that because look what we created with creating Roger. I think we still need strong characters in the police, but with a moral compass that clearly...
That's right, and I agree entirely with you that people who worked with Roger were tainted and often unfairly, and some of them were hard men, because they pretty much were all men back then. But it was a pretty bloody hard job. And most of them, in my opinion, maintained some sort of compass. There might have been a few things, but they weren't running around doing what Roger was doing. They certainly weren't boasting about it. They weren't seeking the limelight. And, sure, we do need hard cops. We need detectives who, I wouldn't use the word intimidating, certainly not to the public, but you need hard detectives, who criminals look at and go, really don't want to run into that bloke or that woman because I know I'm going to be in trouble.
100%, and that's sort of tapping into what I was saying. What Roger's created is it's very easy to slap that down because it's not. When I was a young detective, I was inspired by people that had a reputation, and I was thinking, look at how they do their work. Roger, where I don't like him for 1,000 reasons, but what pisses me off is that the hard detectives have been shamed by people like that. Policing is a robust sport. Sometimes it's a contact sport, and you've got to be prepared to get in there. And if you can do it and hold that moral compass, that's the way to go. But Roger's a classic example of not. But I agree with you. I'll just probably finish off because we've talked about a bygone era. There are too many checks and balances in place now in policing. I can't see it ever happening again. I think even the media are not so in bed with the police in most circumstances, and the courts are. You need autonomy between all those areas: the courts, the media, and the police. So I can't see it happening. If it does, it's going to be fascinating if they can play these two.
I don't think it will ever be as gritty or bad or colourful as that era of the sort of the 70s and early 80s, and those two guys, Rogerson and Ned. Wow, so much happened around them, so many shootings, people who crossed their paths disappearing.
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully we're not going to see that again, ever.
Well, I'll give a shout out to your book too, Neil, because, as I said, I understood that world, but that's a deep dive into it. So the kingpin and the crooked cop, it's a good breed, and I see it now as part of folklore and history, that time. Thanks for coming on I Catch Killers.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers. I think a lot of you have probably seen that TV series Blue Murder about Roger Rogerson and Neddy Smith and things that went on in Sydney's underworld in the 70s and 80s. Well, today I've spoken to Neil Mercer, and he's given us a full, proper insight into that world. And let me tell you, it was murky. And I learnt things. I thought I knew about what went on with Roger Rogerson and Neddy Smith, but I've got to say, the extent of their brazenness and criminality is just extraordinary. Hope it never happens again.